The truth is that African American men commit murder at a much, much higher rate than every other, if you break it just down to the mutable characteristic of complexion, of race, right? And you chunk in like Afro-Caribbean and all this.
That's not true.
Okay, I get that.
That is absolutely not true.
But it is.
Willie D. Live.
And the way you have to change it, square one, is ending this drug war. And of course, Texas, we're fucking ramping it up. I don't know if you've seen the news from this week that now all of a sudden we're ramping up marijuana enforcement.
Before we go down that road, because I did want to touch on that, because I'm glad you mentioned that. I do want to touch on that new law that they just passed. But I want to say this. I do not believe that black people commit the majority of violent crime. Well, I absolutely do not believe that.
I mean, you're wrong.
Yeah,
and it's not always the majority.
This is what I'm saying. I believe that just like black people don't commit the majority of traffic infractions, just like black people don't commit the majority of welfare fraud, black people are just accused more. And that's why, and black people are accused more and they're prosecuted more for these crimes. They're not committing these crimes at a rate substantially higher than any other group. That's why when I hear these people, while I read a lot of comments online, and anytime there's a situation involving a black person who's accused of committing a crime, or actually is in commission of a crime, we watching them commit the crime, somebody will invariably say, the 13% again. The 13% again.
But
and that's based on the usual suspects,
yeah,
right? It's the 13%. They got 13% of the population, but they were committing the majority of the crime. That is a damn lie. That if you think about it, it don't even make sense. What happens is this. Black people, this society that we live in, holds black people's worst as an example of who we are collectively. And they hold their best as an example of who they are collectively.
Well, I think there's an argument that can be made that both ways, right? Like, I think that was clearly the case for decades. I think that now, at least on a macro scale with media and everything, I think we try to, and with government, I think we try to push, everything that white people did historically. We're going to focus on the bad and discount the good. I think we have a pendulum that goes from one extreme to another. But you're wrong, unfortunately, about the data on some violent crime, most violent crime.
And where does this data come from?
Well, so
who's calculating this data?
Well, here's the thing: when the FBI and law enforcement
who is targeting blacks for failure.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
But what we found from looking at the data, because there's been an effort to unpack it and suggest that there's overrepresentations because of the problem in the data. What turns out is that there are a great number of people of color wrongfully misidentified as white. So it caused more harm for those and caused a greater disparity. But there are truths, right? The truth is that African American men commit murder at a much, much higher rate than every other, if you break it just down to the mutable characteristic of complexion, of race, right? And you chunk in like Afro-Caribbean and all this.
That's not true.
Okay. I get that.
That is absolutely not true.
But it is true.
You know what's happening here is that what we see the murder we see the video clips when black people kill each other. We're seeing a lot of stuff like that. Okay. That hits our subconscious and make us think that that's who doing all the killing. But when white folks kill, they kill in droves. Black people.
That's actually wrong as well. It's a popular myth. So the
media who is the usual suspect when there's a mass shooting?
Okay, so this is a popular effort in the media and the Biden administration as well. So what we do now with data is they have parsed it between mass shootings and multiple shootings, right? And they put it in the mass shooting bucket if they've decided that the motivation was political, racist, whatever, right? And they just put it in the multiple shooting bucket if they think it's just crime. And they don't tend to look at the motivation when it is an African American that has committed this multiple shooting. The people getting hit by the bullets, they don't give a shit, right? If you're getting hit by bullets with a bunch of other people, no one cares what the motivation is. You don't want to get shot. African American men commit right about half of, and this is not per capita, this is, total aggregate. About half of the murders in America, and they commit about half of the multiple, if you combine multiple shooting and mass shootings. The only way you get this outsized presence for white men is if you look at just motivation. That's when the Biden administration is very careful to say, white men are most responsible for political violence. Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman.
Oh, we counting police murders? Because police kill about 1,000 people a year.
Police actually kill far less people,
and mostly white police officers.
Right, but officers are murdering at a much lower rate than they're getting murdered.
What's
right?
the number?
I'd have to pull it up. Okay, but the reality is, we need better law enforcement in America. I could give you an hour of what's wrong with law enforcement, but we don't need to have when we have dishonest conversations about the rate of crime. It actually is a disservice to Black America. And in fact, I think it is racist in its nature to suggest that it's, because I don't think it's complexion driven. Like, I don't think...
You don't think what is complexion driven?
I don't think the outsized amount of violence in the Black community has anything to do with the racial identity of being Black, right? I think just like there are plenty of people that now say, white people are this, right? Because you can do that in society, right? You can do it on Instagram. You go to the Fox Face Off Instagram. If someone were to say something racist about a Black person, they are immediately thrown off Instagram. Whereas me, I'm called every name in the book constantly, right? It's okay to demonize. I don't know
about that, Charles. I see people talking stuff about Black people all the time.
No, I get it.
Including Black people.
Right. I do get it, but they're like pejorative words, right? You can use any racial pejorative for a white person. And we have this, and I'm not playing victim. We have this double standard. But here's the thing. None of it has to do with our skin color, right? Like I thought, you have white, there's no shortage of white racists, right? And I think we find a lot of them liberals, right? This myth that
I think
Black...
it's about equal.
So when you look at, liberals and conservatives, but when you have this myth that when you look at the numbers like the SAT or the ACT, and you have this statistical argument that Black people just can't compete, so we have to do away with this test, or we have to do away with this metric or this barrier. We have California and Massachusetts doing away with honors classes, and it's all built around this concept that Blacks just aren't able, right? Which is incredibly racist, right? And when you look at a couple of things, right? You look at the Nigerian performance, right? Foreign-born Nigerian performance in elite academia. It's fucking off the charts, right? It's right up there with Jewish overperformance, right? And then you consider the forced illiteracy in Black America for centuries, right? People don't talk about that. For centuries during the transatlantic horror of slavery, throughout the South, Black slaves were not allowed to learn to read, right? And so when you finally broke those chains and instituted new chains of Jim Crow, right, you didn't have the same intensiveness. And everything, every fucking study says you get books in kids' hands and you make them fucking read when they're little, they're going to perform just as well as other kids, right, that have had the same. And when you look at the numbers of Black parents reading to their children versus white parents reading to their children, right, it's drastically different. And I think it's all downstream from this forced illiteracy. But if we don't have a fucking conversation it's never going to get fixed, right? Instead of saying, oh, well, we're just going to do away with these tests, or we're not going to have this metrics, or we're just going to have this built-in affirmative action bias for forever, it doesn't fix any of the fucking problems. And it's the same thing with crime. When you say, oh, yeah, we're not, there's not more African-American violent criminals per capita or even in gross numbers than other communities, it's nice to believe, it's nice to say, but it doesn't help Black America.